Adam Schiff allegedly used classified information to smear Trump. Then California promoted him to the Senate. Blaze News, The Mandate, starts right now. Welcome in, everyone. I'm Jill Savage. Matthew Peterson is out for one more day, but have no fear. Our DC aficionado is here. Chris Bedford, how's it going out there today?
Thanks. Sweaty, hot, but hey, the Jump Out Boys are cruising around town, just bagging teenagers, making arrests, and scaring the heck out of libs. So, it's a good sweaty day in DC.
So it's okay. And there's so much more going on. These headlines that we get week in and week out, Chris, they're crazy and they just keep coming. And the latest one involves Adam Schiff. We know he's one of the most crooked politicians out there in Congress. And Schiff went through and weaponized his position on the House Intelligence Committee to push the false Russia hoax. And then he paraded in front of every camera that he could find, lying to the American people again and again.
The Russians offered help, which we know they did. The campaign accepted help, which we know they did. The Russians then delivered help, which we know they did.
There is circumstantial evidence of collusion. The case is more than that, and I can't go into the particulars, but there is more than circumstantial evidence now.
Last March, you said you had more than circumstantial evidence of treasonous collusion with Russia.
I've certainly said that there's ample evidence of collusion. But we do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help.
So you can hear, Chris, he's trying to place a narrative in the media again and again and again. But now we have a Democrat whistleblower that came out and told the FBI that Adam Schiff said, oh, it's okay to leak classified information out there, give the intel out there, because we need to hurt Donald Trump. We know that that's what's happening right now.
I mean, this is an old game. I mean, Richard Nixon in his first book, which is one of his better ones, complained bitterly about how John F. Kennedy would go into the classified briefings with him and then come out and make up a bunch of stuff. And he couldn't even refute it because it was classified and give that to the press. Schiff, this is a funny story. I'm glad that there's a Democratic whistleblower on the record, but this is just everyone in D.C. knew it. I remember yelling at the screen when one after another really stupid stories would come out that would be proven false. And after it's proven false, I'd yell at the screen or the newspaper or whatever, when a reporter is going to stop taking tips from Adam Schiff? His game was always to take different classified reports, take things that hadn't been given out, and take sections of it. And these are real sections. And he would get the reporter to look at that section. And these reporters, they're not that bright. And it confirms all of their priors. So what they would do is they'd run to the presses with it. And their editors, it confirms all their priors. So they just say, that looks right. Obviously, Donald Trump is a Russian agent, so we're just going to run with this. And it happened over and over again. I think the only reason it was allowed to continue for so long, and the reporters were willing to be embarrassed so many times by Adam Schiff, is that nobody really actually held them to account. I mean, people got promoted. People got Pulitzers. People got raises. Adam Schiff got a Senate position. No one in their squad, that kind of DC political media squad or the Senate or the Democratic Party squad, was actually ever going to do anything about it. It served the party's interests for you to be out there telling lies. Sure, later on we can retract it. But it's just like the classic story that they teach in newspaper ethics, that if you call somebody a rapist on the front page and then you print, oh, it turns out they're innocent on page 10, the damage is done. That person's reputation's in the gutter. That's not going away. And that's the danger here, and that's what people really benefited from. I really don't think that ethics just went out the window. Good business practices went out the window. Basic journalism went out the window. Needing more than one source and actually having to confirm a story went out the window. And all of these things were ironclad rules of the business. All of them went away in the service of the greater good, which was Orange man bad, we must stop Donald Trump.
If we look at the timeline, like we all lived through 2017, we remember when this was on the news every night. But then you go to 2023, there was the FBI investigation and they were looking into this. Okay, And it's now 2025, right? Kash Patel is coming out saying we found it, we declassified it. Now Congress can actually go through and look at how classified info was leaked to shape all the political narratives and decide for themselves if our institutions were weaponized against the American people. Oh, okay. So 2017 to present day. This is a fairly long time frame for what we're dealing with here. When we had the idea, the inklings there, that something wasn't right with this, right? We've known this for so long. So what does this tell us about just how deep the deep state is, and just the fact that members of Congress had no problem going through and leaking these things to the media, knowing that they were false all along?
And there's such a shamelessness to it, isn't there? Like I said, who's going to hold them to account? I mean, Eric Wemple at the Washington Post, his column is not even printed in the newspaper. It's just printed online. He went through and he said, hey, this is really embarrassing for us, but nobody cared at the end of the day. I mean, it didn't end up mattering. When you don't have any accountability, they'll just continue. And it was successful. And the funny thing is, they weaponized disinformation and used it to undermine faith in American elections and to undermine officials and to target them to achieve political ends. Is that not a problem? I mean, isn't that supposedly the big issue here that everyone's talking about? Is exactly what they did. And I know it's become kind of just like passe or kind of just cliche to point out that things are Orwellian. But when you do that, and then you literally appoint ministers of disinformation, I guess they had different titles, like Undersecretary for Disinformation or something like that. When you do this, you try to throw people's scent off, and you say we're the party that stands against it, and they never were. I mean, and what was the answer from MAGA faithful and people, or the Russian bot farm? It was memes, Facebook memes, and Instagram memes, and Twitter memes, and TikTok reels, and pretty funny ones. Some of them, the American-made ones, but it was always a lie. It was all a lie. And there's a system, an accreditation system in the American media, something that there also has long existed in the Ivy Leagues and with the Pulitzer and with Davos and with all these different clubs and organizations where they accredit each other and they decide who's allowed. There's a reason why Trump's lawyers got disbarred, but the left-wing lawyers that lie repeatedly and who commit property tax fraud and things like that don't ever get disbarred. It's because they've taken over the tools of accreditation. You have to give them a lot of credit. They went from 100 years ago with barely a foothold in peripheral unions and being hunted through Hollywood and being hunted through DC, trying to root them out, and a real underdog movement to controlling every single one of the commanding heights in 100 years. It was a long march. They took it really seriously. They did it really well. They did the jobs that a lot of conservatives don't want to do. They went into academia. They went into this accreditation. They went into journalism. That's one thing we've always been trying to change. The Blaze, before that at Federalist, at Daily Caller, is getting more people to join this profession, for example, who don't just want to be the next Ann Coulter or Tucker Carlson, but want to be the next journalist. Want to be people who are really breaking news, like the next Joe Hanneman, the next Steve Baker, the next Chuck Ross, and promoting those people. I mean, that's why we started a journalism award group at the National Journalism Center that gives out substantial prizes, $10,000, $20,000 prizes every year for the best works and journalists that are going against the narrative. We have to take that sort of stuff seriously to push back against it. And to the Trump administration's credit, they're finally really, as Republicans, finally taking this stuff really seriously, taking the money away, undermining the credibility, telling the AP or Reuters or whoever to take a hike, kicking them off the press pools and saying, we don't need you. You're not even really that relevant as you used to be. And it's been effective, and it's good to see people fighting back.
Yeah, we want the truth out there. We want all of the accountability for people. We want this to come to the forefront. This is why we're bringing you stories like this. But Chris, it's not just us. JD Vance also wants some indictments. Let's go ahead and take a look at the vice president.
They would take something that supported a Hillary Clinton campaign talking point, and they would overemphasize it and exaggerate it. They took anything that actually contradicted that narrative and they buried it deep. And through that, they actually laundered Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign talking points through the American intelligence services. That's a violation of the people's trust. That's a violation of what our intelligence services should be doing. And I absolutely think they broke the law. And you're going to see a lot of people get indicted for that.
So, Chris, it doesn't matter whose name that they use, right? They could go through and they could go say Hillary Clinton. They can say Adam Schiff. Really what this is just the machinery that is behind everybody out there in D.C. that has been going through and figuring out, all right, this is what we need to push this intel narrative forward. But how do they go through and actually address this if we don't have the indictments that JD Vance is asking for?
And if it was a machine, it would be easier to take apart. And people call it that, like it's La Cosa Nostra or something. But there aren't actually orders being given in a lot of these different situations. Sometimes there are, which Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and others have been uncovering, and some of the good work that's coming out of Congress, Chuck Grassley, et cetera. But it's more like a living organism. A lot of people just know what to do. They know what their duty is. They know how it works. You don't need to tell it to breathe in order for it to take its next breath. You don't need to tell its heart to beat in order for its heart to beat. These people are committed, and they know that you feed information to journalists. Journalists are hungry. You just throw in bait, and from there it'll spread. You know that the late night show hosts who are finally getting canceled because they're not funny and they just become more mouthpieces for this propaganda network will put it out there. You know that if you put out a couple easy words that make this, or phrases like 30-year low, which is totally bollocks, by the way. If you put out these phrases that allow people to sound smart, they'll just repeat it over and over and over again. All the networks ad nauseum, like they're all speaking with a single voice, because they don't actually know, and most of them aren't actually doing the reading. So they're going to look at their friends and see what they're doing. Twitter was an extremely useful tool for that for a long time. I don't know if all of this would have been nearly as successful. The crusades that happened against the corporations, the wokeification of American corporate life, the wokeification of a lot of the heights that we saw of American business and academia and media. If Elon Musk had controlled Twitter earlier and been open to the ideas he's open to now earlier, and not been actually pushing this stuff into that ecosystem and that narrative. But you need those punishments, like you said. And it's so refreshing to see JD Vance actually talking like this. Can you imagine Vice President Paul Ryan talking like this? I mean, maybe Vice President Dick Cheney, who was pretty much an aberration as far as those go. You wouldn't ever actually hear Vice President H.W. Bush talking about this. Absolutely not. They would do the thing that they do, which the consultants told them threatening. Well, they make a point. Like, they don't point at them, just use your thumb. And they would say, it's inappropriate for me to make any kind of to discuss an ongoing operation. But what's really important is that we all get along and that America's unified. That's what they would say. And then the left would just sneer and go back to trying to put them in prison the next opportunity they got. Vance is built differently. That's why they hate him so much, by the way. They really deeply hate JD Vance. Trump is built differently. That's one of the reasons they hate him. And that's why so many Republicans hated Trump so much, too, is because he's not just a disruptor of the Democratic establishment or the elite establishment. He's massively a disruptor of the Republican establishment. He's exposed so much of it, starting with him on stage back in 2016, saying, yeah, I did this, I did that because I'm smart. He kind of appealed to that American love of the billionaire who's not standing outside the house saying torch the mansion, but is inside the house, like Teddy Roosevelt, throwing the chair through the glass and leaning in and saying to the people, everyone in here is super corrupt. Everyone in here is super bad, and they're all screwing you, and you need to do something about it. I'm opening the door, come on in. People like that in the United States, and they like people are actually going to hold them accountable. And JD Vance talking like this now is also important to kind of give you a little bit of a white pill with all the black pills that you want to take, because, like you said, this has been going on forever. I mean, just this one investigation has been going on for 9 years. And we used to go on with, he was talking right there to the Fox Business House, and Maria Bartiromo She's been talking about this for 9 years. I used to do the show with her once a week and sometimes co-host. And she would always say, when is someone going to go to prison? When is someone going to go to prison? And the answer is always never, never. But when you see that coming out of the vice president, when you see the stuff coming out of the FBI, when you see the DOJ aligned behind this, when you see it being put out to the newspapers, it actually gives me a glimmer of hope that maybe a couple people will. And the way you train a living organism, unlike a machine, is you can't just remove a couple cogs. You have to punish it. You have to make it feel actual pain. And putting people in prison and showing that there are consequences for these actions will help you do that.
Listen, I'm not going to hold my breath because I've seen how this has been going, but I would love to believe that that's going to happen. As long as we're talking about vice presidents, let's go ahead and bring Kamala Harris back into the conversation because we haven't talked about her in a long time. And Kamala loved nothing more
out for this one.
than a Venn diagram. She loved them. She had them all over the place, right? So if we bring the Venn diagram, the Kamala Harris Venn diagram back in, and we have Joe Biden, we can do the auto pen that they're talking about with Oversight Project and our friend Mike Howell, and then we bring Adam Schiff in and the pardons, right? This is all coming together now. All of these stories that we have been talking about on the mandate for the last few months are now coming together in this one story that we have here. So where do we think, Adam Schiff, he's been pardoned. Is this going to last? I mean, the auto pen is going to change a lot of things because Adam Schiff right now, it looks like if we just go with what we know right now, hey, like prison time, like that's looking more appealing if you're sitting here on the right.
It is, and they need a test case. The auto pen thing is going to come down to a test case. A lot of people, even inside the White House, were skeptical it's ever actually going to happen. A lot of people around conservative DC are skeptical it's actually ever going to happen. But Mike Howell's really laid it out. You just need that test case where you charge somebody with crimes that have been revealed and they try to appeal to their pardon. And you have to make the case then. So choose your case carefully. Choose your judge carefully. Choose your jurisdiction carefully. And you're going to have to look at this pardon and decide whether or not it's legitimate. And then the Supreme Court's going to have to figure that out too, because it is not just going to stop there. There's going to be an appeals process. Meanwhile, you've got a limited timeline. I mean, maybe Republicans have 8 years. Maybe they've got 12 years. Maybe they just have the remaining 3.5 or so before there's a Democratic president that comes in and all this stuff gets shut down and all this stuff ends. And then by the time Republicans get back, either they've lost their appetite for it or everyone says, listen, this is old news. Statute of limitations has run out, this and that. They need to pick that case, fight the pardon question, fight its legitimacy. I actually think they've got a good case for it because this is not a power given to the executive, as we've talked about in the mandate. This is a power given to the president, not to his officers, not to the Oval Office, not to the office of the president, but to the president specifically. So if he wasn't doing it, he wasn't even aware of it, which will be harder to prove, then maybe you can really pop that balloon and start to go after all these different people.
Well, people have been skeptical about what's going on in D.C. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, Chris Bedford will break down some personal stories about what's happening in our nation's capital. Well, every day you think you know what's actually going on at the grocery store. You think you know what food you're buying, but then you find out that 4 billion pounds of meat were imported to the United States just last year. And all of that can be labeled like it's right here from America. And you have to start thinking, like, what are we actually eating? If this label says product of the United States and the meat wasn't raised here, then what other games are they playing? So I need to look at Good Ranchers because their meat is 100% American. It's born, raised, and harvested on local farms, and it's delivered right to your door. I'm a subscriber myself, and let me tell you, it's worth every penny. You can get $40 off every box, free shipping, and for a free gift in every order. That's free meat. People, you can get bacon, seed oil-free chicken nuggets, Wagyu burgers. You can switch them up from month to month and try something new. So if you're worried about signing up for a subscription, you can pause it, delay it, cancel it anytime. There's no stress or lock-in, and it's very flexible. Thousands of people have already made the switch, and the reviews are amazing. So head over to goodranchers.com and see what everybody's talking about. Use the code Jill. You'll get $40 off plus free meat for life with your subscription. It's goodranchers.com. welcome to the table. Well, Chris Bedford isn't just our man in D.C. He's been the man in D.C. for over 2 decades. And Chris, you've seen just a ton of changes over the years in the city. So why do you think the Capitol needs all this federal intervention that we've been talking about here with Donald Trump and taking over the city?
Yeah, I have. I've seen the city. I got here in 2004, which was right after the bad old days. I mean, some of the American cities turned around their act in the 90s. Some others turned them around in 2000. Some of them were never able to turn them around. You had things like stop and frisk was introduced. You had the three strikes laws that were introduced in a lot of places in the 90s. You had mandatory minimum sentencing that was introduced to restrain these left-wing judges that had come out of this movement in the America in the 50s and 60s that had been towards rehabilitation and towards decriminalization, and had resulted in a kind of nightmarish 80s and 90s for crime for a lot of people in a lot of American cities. It took a long time to get out of that. You had the crack epidemic, you had the breakdown of the families, and DC had generally itself been hollowed out in the late 60s by the last straw. There was a lot of riots throughout the Nixon years, for example, in the 60s and 70s, but the MLK riot really chased out the black middle class, the black upper class, and essentially all the white people just left. And all that was left in DC was an underclass, a lot of broken families. And then drugs came in, and it was just a disaster. It took a lot of hard work to change that. It took a succession of mayors that took it very seriously, that worked really hard with development companies to try to get them in here and get them to develop places that weren't great, and to work with businesses and to start restaurants and to get things going where people no longer had to just eat at home or have those one steakhouse in the city of the Palm. And if you were the president, I always went there because that was the only restaurant outside of the clubs, really. It took a lot of work. It took serious policing. I mean, I remember when this stuff was fresh in 2004, 14th Street, for example, was a no-go zone. It was burnt out shops, flea markets, an AIDS clinic, and punk rock shows, which is why I would go down there. And now it's a vibrant, or it was in 2020, a pretty vibrant place. I mean, the Obamas took their kids there to go out to dinner. Fast forward to 2021, and you see CNN reporters out there eating dinner. Well, gunshots erupt next door, and the people start fleeing because they stopped that policing that kept it all in check. They saw. I remember in 2004 there was a succession of brutal crimes in Georgetown. I was working down at a bar down there, Old Glory, which is since gone, and a jeweler was shot in the head in broad daylight by thugs who were robbing the place. An English exchange student was walking his girlfriend a night or two around there in Upper Georgetown when his girlfriend was sexually assaulted by a bunch of kids who weren't from the Georgetown area. And when he tried to resist, they slit his throat and he died. And the response from police was to put roadblocks and identity checks around the neighborhoods that the perpetrators and the suspects had come from, and to issue a summer-long citywide curfew for anyone under the age of 18 to be out after it was like 7 p.m. I remember it'd be at 7 p.m. We'd be at shows, maybe 6 p.m., whatever it was, and all the young kids would have to go home and get back to their parents' house or get back to wherever they were because they would be arrested. It was all taken seriously. And when things get good, you've heard the old maxim about hard times. When things get good, people forget about it. And there was always a kind of resentment that kind of was bubbling up in DC because there's no doubt that not all the communities benefited completely from the policing. I mean, there was benefits. There was peripheral benefits. There was no murders in the gentrified areas. And when there were serious crackdowns. The thugs used to refer to the different types of people in DC as taxpayers, which meant leave them alone. The cops will care. And everyone else, who the cops they knew, wouldn't really care. Now, policing benefited all of these neighborhoods, but it certainly benefited the wealthier neighborhoods the most. And since DC is such a transient population of people who are professionals with college educations, who make good salaries, who come in and generally all work in one industry, largely. It's starting to change a little bit, especially up till 2020, with more business coming in, but they all work in the political industry. And then there's a kind of permanent underclass with decades of broken families, decades of no dads, decades of no jobs, living on welfare, and decades of crime that exists. There's a lot of animosity in the city, a lot of tension. And the activists noticed this, and they took advantage of it. And they took kind of a well-oiled but very corrupt Democratic machine took over the city council, the woke white liberals. I've met them. I've told them I'm not voting for them ever when they'd ask me for their votes. My vote. They came in and said, well, what if we broke this cycle? This is kind of a noble effort. Let's break the cycle where there's generations of young men who from the age of 16 and 17 are in the criminal justice system and involved in crime, and we get them out of it. But their solution was not education. I mean, the one young, charismatic, handsome black politician before Barack Obama was Adrian Fenty, who came in and won in the landslide in DC. He was unelected 4 years later because he dared to ask why DC public schools were totally satisfied with graduating literally illiterate students year after year who had no prospects except for crime, even difficult to get into the military when you can't read very well or can't read at all. So you had crime or you had menial labor. And most of them chose crime because that was flashy. And that's what the pop culture said to do. And that's what they'd heard that dad had done if they'd ever met him. So he tried to challenge that. He got unelected, but the unions turned against him. So their only other solution was, well, we'll close the schools for COVID because we don't want anyone to get hurt. And we'll stop penalizing crime. And then maybe this generation will be freed from this. And there's an awful irony in it because now this generation, a lot of the youths in it know nothing but crime. I mean, some of the most awful and vicious attacks of the last 5 years in DC have been committed by these 13, 14, 15, and 16-year-olds who have no parental structure, who leave their neighborhood or stay in their neighborhood. They've got no moral role models. They've got no education. They've got guns that they're able to get on the black market. And they go out and they commit these heinous crimes, and then they're not held responsible. Well, now they're being held responsible. And the irony of this, just like the irony of the reformers in the 50s and 60s, is it ends up with an even bigger prison population. It's the exact opposite. And along the way, you have 1-year-olds getting shot in the head in the backseat of their father's cars. You've got 6-year-old girls getting gunned down by stray bullets. It's hard to even think about the human cost of these utopians and what they've actually done and what they unleashed on this city. And there's a sense of, even though in some places that you'll hear by these lemmings in the media, 30-year low, 30-year low, 30-year low. That's completely false. For example, they stopped counting carjackings as violent crime. And a carjacking is not a car theft. That's when someone takes you out of your car at gun or knife point or tasers or whatever, forces you out of your vehicle and takes your vehicle. One woman got carjacked in 2021 at 1:30 p.m. with her 8-month-old infant in the back seat. That's insane. And the perpetrator didn't care. An Uber Eats driver got carjacked. A 65-year-old father who was supporting 4 people and his wife got carjacked. And when he resisted, 13 and 15-year-old girl dragged him along until he hit a pole and was crushed to death. And when they were pulled out by police after this grisly broad daylight murder, the girl was more concerned about where's my cell phone. Give me a break. This is these individuals who didn't have any school, didn't have any consequences. The police's hands were tied. The prosecutors refused to do anything. The politicians were apologizing for them. The liberals were saying this is just an expression of voiceless people. Now they end up in the criminal justice system. And when they threw the books, supposedly, at these girls for murdering someone by crushing him to death in broad daylight with no remorse, that meant 7 years. Because the ridiculousness of some of the juvenile laws that we've created that these kids are put into, like, oh, they're just kids. I got news to you. If your kid is torturing a family pet to death, you've got a serious lifelong problem on your hands. If your kid is torturing humans to death, that ain't going to get fixed with 7 years of rehabilitation. This is a person who, through maybe a lot of them never had a chance. It's actually extremely sad, which is why the Adrian Fenty story is so sad. They never had a chance. They never had a family. They never had a moral compass, moral guides that teach the kind of things that teach your kids not to be animals. They never had policing. They didn't have schools. They didn't have teachers. And the teachers who do care get ground down and beaten down by the system. Or physically attacked in the hallways with no repercussions. What are they going to do? So these kids end up here, and then the solution was just to let them run free. And that's going to end up with a lot of people in prison. And usually this takes 10, 20 years of serious decline in the mayhem for you to start to see a turnaround, for you to start to see a new generation come up and say, we're dispensing with this. But because of President Trump coming in, he said, no, it's over now. We're going to end this cycle right now. These 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds who are leading the next generation of 10 and 11 and 9-year-olds into this life, they're off the street. And we don't need to be stupid about this. We can roll up to Navy Yard and we see 20 kids wearing balaclavas in 91-degree heat. They're not COVID conscious. They're out to commit crimes. And I bet if we search them, we're going to find illegal handguns. And that's what's going on right now. And they're rounding up criminals, illegal handguns, illegal drugs. I mean, just a few years ago, you had the DC mayor of police on air in tears saying, they won't let me prosecute illegal gun crimes. And more than half the time, within 6 months, I'm picking up that same person for murder or armed burglary or shooting. And then maybe I can get a prosecution. But that murder or that shooting or that burglary never would have even happened had I been able to prosecute that gun crime. And my hands are being tied by the politicians. Friends of mine tried to get in touch with him and say, we want to run you for office. But he was retiring. He was done with the whole thing. And I kind of get it. The good people get really ground down by this system. So it's really important for an outside force to come in and say, no more. It's important for police who don't always have to live there and be threatened in the communities to come in and say, we're doing something about this. We're going to take care of it. We're going to end that cycle. And even discounting the politics, just talking about the humanity and the human score of this, the businesses. I mean, I'll just tell one more story because I can go on forever with these stories. But a friend of mine's daycare that she brought her kids to shut down because the homeless would live out front and they would just sleep there and do drugs in public spaces. And what mother wants to drop their kids off at a nice licensed downtown daycare when they have to walk through heroin needles to get there? They're not going to do it. A nail salon a friend went to shut down for the exact same reasons. Who wants to go get their toes done before they go to the beach? If there are drug addicts and criminals hanging out on the corner, they'll go somewhere else. They'll go to Old Town. They'll go to Virginia. They'll leave. It just destroyed businesses. It destroyed a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. It destroyed communities. My whole Knights of Columbus Council, all of the officers, except for one, moved their whole family out. And the year before, we've been begging the priest to reopen the Catholic school there. And he was rightly, sadly, skeptical, saying, I've seen people come through before trying to do this, and they all leave when things turn bad. But it was too dangerous for our families in our neighborhood, a nice neighborhood that used to be filled with children and parents when I got there, or people walking their dogs. It's now just young renters and unemployed people because of this change in the city. It destroys communities. It destroys social fabric. It has human costs. And there are so many parents out there who are never getting their kids back because of these animals were allowed to run loose. And just screw the DC reporters, screw the politicians saying it's not happening. It is happening, and it's ruining lives. And thank God someone is doing something about it.
Yeah, that's such a good encapsulation of the 20 years that you spent in D.C. And I can say this from living in other blue cities across the country. I had to live in San Francisco for a year. That's where work was headquartered. There are so many of the same stories all across the country, but it's good to see Donald Trump trying to go through and actually make something of our nation's capital, because this is important. This is what everybody, the rest of the world, is going to be looking at Washington, D.C. to see what kind of a city we are presenting for just all of ourselves out there, Chris.
Yeah, for a whole year. I mean, and in 2019, if you came into Union Station, there was a beautiful restaurant under the rotunda in the center where you could get a nice glass of wine or a sandwich or something. There was restaurants that were more affordable. There was a happy food court down below you could take your family to. There were shops. You could buy a business tie. You could buy electronics. You could pick up whatever you wanted to. It was like a miniature mall. And out front, you'd see Columbus Circle and the Capitol right there. It was so refreshing back in the day to leave vile, leaky Penn Station in New York City, get off the Amtrak in DC, and just be in this beautiful area with beautiful lanterns and quiet and wildlife, birds and squirrels and things like that. That's not like we had deer in the city, except during COVID. It was nice. And then after 2020, it was a homeless camp. I mean, complete with $500 and $600 REI tents that 21-year-old activist women, white women, had bought for these guys so they could set up camp at Union Station to do drugs, and the drug dealers you would see going from tent to tent, talking to half passed out people, taking the money that they'd spanged in exchange for another hit and not being punished. And all the shops shut down. All the restaurants left. There's a couple places that are hanging on. There was a shooting at one. And they would say, well, how are we supposed to do anything about homeless people? If they want to sleep on the floor of the train station, aren't they allowed to? This was the entryway to the United States Capitol. And there used to be a thing amongst DC politicians. They put a homeless shelter that was really a nasty place. It finally got shut down because of the massive influx of illegal aliens took it over. It finally got shut down, but they put it at one of the highways that enters Capitol Hill with the express point of telling DC's national politicians, you can't hide from the reality of the slums that the city has because you're unwilling to do something about it. I just don't think those local politicians thought that the guy who was going to do something about it was Donald Trump.
They did not. When we come back, we are going to look at what Donald Trump is, they're calling it his worst nightmare. It's in another blue city, New York City. We'll take a look at that next.
My administration would be Donald Trump's worst nightmare. And you don't need to take me at my word or take Andrew Cuomo at his. You need to only look at the actions of the Trump administration since I won the Democratic primary. How else can you describe a president who has proposed denaturalizing the Democratic nominee of New York City? How else can you describe a president who has sought to entertain suggestions of deporting me, of arresting me, of taking control of the city over the will of New Yorkers? Those are the actions of a president who is afraid of the fact that I will actually deliver in a manner where he is simply betrayed.
So we see all the communists are trying to take over New York City, Chris, and Elizabeth Warren calls it the future of the party. Everything is not going to look like when we had Rudy Giuliani, right? We were talking about cleaning up cities. The New Yorkers are like, please do anything to make our streets safe and just to be able to walk around again. This is the exact opposite of what we know from a good, clean New York where people could take their families around.
I know. And so many New Yorkers I know would always gripe about how they missed the good old days when New York was a tough city and they didn't have an M&M store in Times Square, but they didn't really. Maybe they thought they did, but that was because they were 22 when it was a tough old city, and they actually didn't miss it. And those grimy days are back. But it used to be a maxim in New York that a mayor's job was to plow on time and safely and to keep crime down. And if you could do that, you'd be elected over and over again, and no one cared about anything other than that. And that's kind of gone out the window, this new generation. And you see this in democratic cities across the globe, across the country. You see it in Philadelphia, where there was a democratic machine or a living organism, as we talked about earlier, the unions and everyone else that really ran politics. But the new woke left that took over with the gentrification that was brought by pro-business Democrats that allowed for wealthy people to move into the city and start to have an impact there. Those new wokesters that they elected threw all that out the window. And with that, kind of corrupt old city machines, they also threw out good policing and they threw out efficient services. And it ended up being kind of a disaster for all these different cities. I guess the thing about New York, when they elected de Blasio and people predicted doom, is it takes a long time for socialists to run out of your money when you're the richest city in the world. And that seems to be the case. They're continuing down this path. They haven't run out of money yet. They haven't run all the billionaires out yet because the glitz and the glamour keeps them coming. The businesses still want to be there, but more and more, they're getting fed up. They're finding out what Gavin Newsom's finding out. Even the golden promised land of California, businesses can have enough before they finally leave. And they say, I'm done with this. I'm not staying here. Even a beautiful city like you used to live in, San Francisco, businesses can have enough and say, I'm out of here. We're leaving. And people move out with their families too. New York hasn't hit that rock bottom yet. It's like a drug addicted relative where you think, surely this is the time. Surely this is rock bottom. Surely they'll turn it around. And then they surprise you by just rolling over off another cliff and it goes down even deeper. That's kind of the reality, and that's what New York's facing.
Well, and what New York is facing right now is Mamdani, who's going through and making housing the pillar of his campaign. He wants the rent freezes out there, and he's going through and he's even talking, Chris, about like abolishing private property. That's not going to work well. You're not going to have anybody left in your city if you're like, hey, all that property that you think you own, no, that's not yours anymore.
You don't have to be a time traveler from the future. You could be anyone who read a book about the past to realize that that doesn't work. I mean, that's why John Locke, for his faults, put property as one of the basic human rights, because without your ability to own what you have, your other rights kind of go out the window with it. And you'll find those people who are quick to take away that property right will find that they'll lose a lot of other rights along the way with it. I mean, there are tens of thousands of apartments in New York City that sit vacant because they're stuck in rent control, which, on some level makes sense because the rent is too damn high in New York. That candidate was right, and it's unlivable for huge numbers of people. And you have to be wealthy to live decently, even half decently in New York, or to have a window or an apartment you're able to do a push-up in. And it is a problem, but these tens of thousands of apartments are sitting vacant because they're not worth renovating and bringing up to code because they wouldn't make enough money. And it's more use of the landlords to just let them sit there. And instead of addressing that kind of root cause and trying to figure out, well, how do we allow more building? They can't in that hive city. How do we figure this out in a way that allows people to actually not be completely constrained by this, to be willing to rent out these empty lots? They say, well, they shouldn't have them then. Seize them. Seize the property. And I don't think that's going to work either. That's just doubling down. That's like the liberal reformers in DC who tried to fix the generations of people who ended up in prison by saying, all right, no more laws, also no more school. It's dumb, and it has terrible effects.
Well, Chris, I'm sure for $3,500, you too could have a beautiful apartment the size of a closet. It's out there. You just have to go find it. You can. I'm sure out there in New York, they'll be
That way you'll get
beautiful.
sunlight. Not in Manhattan.
They'll be beautiful, tiny little apartments. But, don't worry. I'm sure that you'll be able to afford everything else because he's trying to make sure that the grocery stores out there don't have to pay any rent either. It's getting crazy. All the communism that is going through New York, we don't want to see that. But when we come back, we're going to wrap up the show with Donald Trump and the policies that he has that have been so effective. He has made Democrats really bend to his will. We'll wrap up the show with some replies from you right after this. So Trump's D.C. takeover has a lot of Democrats defending crime. We've talked about it all show. So I posted on X, Trump's got Dems to defend higher taxes, illegal immigration, federal bureaucracy, and criminals. Trump keeps on choosing the sides of the American people. So what's the next big issue that he'll get liberals to defend? Let's go ahead and rapid fire get through some of these replies. Urban Surf says that this doesn't even include the trans issue, which is a great point. Jim wrote voter ID, and Edward replied that maybe living wages is next. I mean, they believe that there are no illegal immigrants, so they believe that everyone deserves a living wage. As for me, I'll have a beer, he says, a root beer. So I don't know, Chris. Maybe he's not going on the D.C. bar crawl that you've laid out a couple different times. But there are a lot of good answers here with, one, the trans issue. That's one of the biggest issues that we've seen where real changes have been made in the Trump administration. But also I like Jim's answer of voter ID. Like, that would be a great one if we could actually get that implemented going forward, because there are so many things that we could fix with just one quick law change.
And these are 7-3 and 6-4 issues. And the Democrats keep on choosing the wrong side. But more than that, they're all issues that people actually vote on. I remember a guy from the Reagan administration standing up in a meeting 10 years ago and saying, all the Republicans need to run on is missile defense and in God we trust on the coin, because those are 9-1 issues. The problem is that no one actually votes on those issues. They don't seem to impact people so directly. Crime, illegal immigration, working elections nowadays. These sorts of trans issue because of women's sports and bathrooms and schools. These things actually really do impact people. And Trump has chosen the right side in all of them. He keeps on surprising me. Like when the Democrats wanted to stop talking about illegal immigration, he changed it and said, well, I'm going to make an Alcatraz with alligators. And then they all had to talk about it again. He's so good at just working them just right to make them flip out. And I'd love to see what comes next.
Yeah, Chris, I wonder how Donald Trump is actually going to go through and make D.C. safer, because you are out there and you're like, Jill, D.C.'s great. You should come out here all the time. And then I go, Chris, my parents are going to be watching this and they're going to be like, there's no way we're letting you go out to Washington, D.C. So what are the odds that we think this is actually going to get turned around in the next, I don't know, year or so?
I mean, high. You could do this quickly. Giuliani did this quickly in New York. You'd smash and disrupt the gangs, and you get rid of the street junkies. You start to change the petty theft and the petty crime. DC is not lost. It's not like San Francisco. It is 6 years from its heyday, from the time it was the nicest in its history, the time it was a great spot for going out, a great spot for raising a family, a great spot for starting a life. That's become a lot more difficult these past couple of years, but it's so recent, and Trump has moved so quickly in a way that local politicians would not have. And I'm actually think there could be a future there.
So you're saying that the way to get back to a nice city is actually make lawlessness not look as appealing and actually just go through and enforce the law. This is the way to get a city back.
No need to invent new laws.
It's crazy to think.
Just enforce the things that are on the books. That's all you have to do. You don't need new things. You don't need to come up with new theories. This is not like New York trying to figure out how to find more spaces to rent in a hive city. This is much simpler than that. And it's an easier problem to fix. And this is one of those few problems where a hammer on a nail is actually the solution.
And I look at what Donald Trump has done, right? And we've seen the changes that he's made in the White House, making that more beautiful. There's gold leaf everywhere. I saw a tweet one of the other days, and they were like, hey, all right, enough with the gold leaf. But, you know, Donald Trump cares about the aesthetics. So he is not going to give up until things in that city are right. And it's not only just the appearances of the city, which we know the man likes, but it's actually going to go through and make it more appealing just for people and families to come and actually enjoy time in our nation's capital, which should just be par for the course. We shouldn't even have to think about what's going on out there. It should just be a natural thing that you are safe to walk along the National Mall and see all of the beautiful sights and all of the history that is there, right there in Washington, D.C.
It used to be safe, and it can be safe again. And it can be cleaned up again, and you can make DC beautiful again. I mean, he chose James McCreary, one of the best architects on the planet, and a friend of mine, to do the White House. That's going to be a beautiful addition, and that addition, I'll notice, is not quite as golden as the new Oval Office. It's more classical. I mean, our founders understood that you needed beauty in public spaces and beauty in civic architecture to make a country legitimate and to attach its people to where they came from and what they're attached to and the civilization that they are a part of. And Donald Trump actually seems to be taking that very seriously, and so do the people around him. And it's morning in America. It's a great thing.
It'll be easier to clean up the streets than it will be the deep state, but the deep state is the ultimate issue that needs to be cleaned up there in Washington, D.C. And we'll be digging in to all of the documents, everything that comes out. Bedford, great seeing you today.
This was an awesome show. I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, don't go anywhere. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a good one, everyone.